The starting point is you don't have a lot of space, so grow the things that are going to bring you the most joy. It doesn't make any sense to plant something that you don't like. If you only have space for one tree, make sure you're planting a tree that you really like and you really care about. It's funny to me how often people plant the wrong thing in a small space because they didn't do the research. So if you're limited on space, make sure you're really researching what you're planting and make sure that what you're planting is going to bring you a lot of joy. Make sure you're very mindful of the microclimate in your small landscape. And if you plant a large tree on the south side, it's going to shade everything. So if you really want to maximize the growing potential, you also want to maximize the available sunlight. You ideally plant your largest plants more on the north side, and then you create sort of a sun trap where you have your tallest plants and a height gradation going from your trees to then larger shrubs, to then smaller shrubs, to then larger perennials, to then shorter perennials, to then your lawn or patio space. And the more that you prioritize this type of height gradation, going from south to north with smaller to larger plants. And again, in the southern hemisphere, everything is flipped because the sun comes from a different side. You generally want to plant with this height gradation in mind. So that way you're maximizing the sunlight. And that's especially true if you're growing food. If you're growing food, the yield that you can obtain from a garden is always proportional to the amount of sunlight. So if your large apple tree is shading your vegetable garden and it's planted in the wrong space, then you're going to really decrease the available yield. So put your larger plants all the way to the north and put your shorter plants all the way to the south and generally lay out your garden that way. Another excellent way to really maximize the growability of a small garden is through growing vertically, using trellises, using structures. The specifics of which plants you're growing are going to be so specific to your interests and your goals, probably not even helpful to go into this plant or that plant. Generally, what I can say is if you're growing food, growing large squash plants that are going to just take over, it's not an efficient use of space. Or growing like one grapevine that just covers the entire area, that's not an efficient use of space. But growing greens and herbs that are smaller, you're going to be able to obtain a much larger harvest and really maximize that smaller space. If you're growing food, utilize the shade. For example, you can grow mushrooms in a relatively small space in areas where other plants are not going to thrive. You can grow shiitake mushrooms, wine cap mushrooms, lion's mane mushrooms, all different types of edible and culinary mushrooms will grow in the shade. So a way to really maximize a small garden is use every microclimate to its fullest, to maximize the available sunlight, but also use the shade. And think about this idea of multifunctionality. Every design element is serving multiple functions. Really do your research on which trees and shrubs to plant. Have a little bit of fun with the perennials, but be mindful of their different growing habits. If you plant a very aggressive plant like hardy kiwi or grapes or mint, it's going to take over your garden, and that aggressiveness might decrease your capability of growing more things. So when it comes to growing in a small garden, really prioritize the plants that are going to bring you the most joy. I think that's the most important thing.